Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, welcome back to the Wade Borth podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me, somebody that I was introduced to about a year ago and has become a really good friend of this podcast, a good friend of mine, a good friend of Factum Financial, and I want to introduce Brian Fleming. So welcome, Brian. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. So, we met. I was trying to think. We probably met at a think tank. Maybe it goes back a little further than that, but we were at a infinite banking think tank a year ago, where we had a first time I remember getting together with you, and we hit off a great conversation. And what I really liked about what I heard from you is, I see you as part of my community. What I mean by that is, I look for certain characteristics in people, and you checked a lot of those boxes, right? So you're wanting to learn, you're wanting to serve, you had a caring heart, and it's like, I want to go out and I want to deliver some value to your people that you were doing. And it's interesting because your background is in law enforcement, so it's an interesting tie-in, and I'm interested to get into that as we go into the conversation. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, Brian, just give me just a little bit of like who you are, where you came from. You're living in Wisconsin right now, but have you always lived there? And there's a lot of questions I'll have, so I'll just let you kind of throw out your little bio. Like, tell me your story real quick.
Sure. Well, as we know, the infinite banking thing has to do with insurance. I tell my story like this. I had my insurance licenses over 30 years ago. But I realized knocking on doors to make a living wasn't as fun as kicking them in, so I became a cop. Well, now I'm back in insurance because I stumbled on the infinite banking concept. No one told me about it. I just stumbled on it because I was running a real estate investment club. And through the process of doing that, and maybe changing the way the format was and whatever, something came up and one thing led to another, and infinite banking, and what is this? I'm like, holy cow, no way. And I needed something to do when I retired from law enforcement, so now I got back in insurance and teach the infinite banking concept.
Oh, so have you always been, what town do you live in now?
Well, I'm in Hartford, Wisconsin.
Okay. Have you always lived in that neck of the woods, or have you always been a Wisconsinite, or did you live other places, or?
Well, yeah, always a Wisconsinite. I'm born, raised, lived in the city of South Milwaukee, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. All my life, that's where I was a police officer until I moved to Hartford about 4.5 years ago, which is about a mile north. Or, an hour north.
Yeah, okay. So you're kind of living in the same neck of the woods, and you get to see some of the same people and serve the same people you've known your whole life then. So.
Yep.
So it's interesting. I love the idea of, kicking in doors is easier than knocking on doors. That visual is just kind of funny because it's sometimes hard to, go and get to know people and meet people, but you seem to have a really good knack with having conversations with people. So I'm curious, just like law enforcement, again, a lot of people don't know what that means, but you went up to the ranks. You served in law enforcement for how many years?
25
years. So you've seen almost all the aspects of law enforcement, I would imagine. How does that relate to this idea of teaching and having people, what I like to call empowering people to take control of that banking function in their lives? Where's the crossover of those skills you have in law enforcement and where it works in teaching people and guiding people through this idea of infinite banking?
Well, a couple things. Again, obviously, infinite banking has to do with life insurance. My first, kick at the cat in the insurance businesses over 30 years ago brought me to have a passion for life insurance, that we should have as much life insurance as humanly possible up until the day we die. I had a lot of it on me as a police officer. My wife stayed home to raise the kids. If I died, what's going to happen to her? How is she going to raise the kids? How is she going to be able to pay the mortgage, whatever? And I had a lot on her because if she died, how do I raise the kids while I'm out there patrolling the streets, right? So I've always had a passion for life insurance. Yeah, it was nice to have some through the city I worked for. They gave me some, but that's just sugar on top. I had most of mine on my own personal individual policies. And that being said, law enforcement is it's a dangerous occupation. I mean, you can get hurt or killed in the line of duty, and now you have this life insurance to protect you. With law enforcement, our job was to protect and serve, to arrest people that are maybe doing things they aren't supposed to be doing and lock them up. Now I start to think about locking up like our money, like we are taught to do in the normal financial world. We're just taught to lock it up. park and pray, and then hopefully it'll be there for when we retire. I was part of that process. I had money in a 403b. It's still in a 403b. But when I started to understand the real secrets of money, how money works through the infinite banking concept and other things, I stopped making contributions to that account. And so that's why I just like to teach police officers, about this. Stop locking our money up like we lock up prisoners, as well as just have a lot of life insurance. It could be through the infinite banking concept. It could be just some other product or whatever. But that's just my story there.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. The visual of locking your money up, because I think a lot of people have a tendency to believe, that life insurance has just this one value, and that's death benefit. But as you approach it, as you talk to people, there's multiple benefits to that, right? If we're doing it with a properly structured whole life insurance policy, I think that's the real key, is like using the right tool for the right purpose and having that conversation. I think that's where you can bring a lot of depth of the conversation to people, is like, is your money stored in the place that it's getting all the benefits you deserve? I think that's a question we'd love to ask, right? And so maybe just really quickly talk about kind of how people perceive life insurance as just a one benefit product, when in all reality, there's multiple benefits. Maybe if you wouldn't mind just kind of touching on that and expanding on that.
Sure, and I think that goes back to being a police officer. It was my job to seek the truth, to bring victims back to as whole as possible because of their victims. So I say I'm a cop who sought the truth. Now I teach financial truth. Unfortunately, we just aren't taught these things in the financial world, in the financial space. I don't know why. There's a lot of noise out there. The whole buy term, invest the difference, which, by the way, I lived that for over 30 years until I took the time to see what the other side of the story is. There's always two sides to every story. I took the time and I found out how powerful and beautiful a cash value life insurance policy can be. Does that mean that's what you should have? Well, to be honestly, probably. We should have some term, some perm or permanent. But yeah, because we're not taught these things, we just don't know. And that's why I like being out there to teach people about life insurance. It could be some term or inexpensive thing going into perm, but some people think it should only be term and nothing else. I think that's very dangerous. I think it's silly and misguided.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, like you said, it's, bringing the truth. That's a great point to make out, is like, as a detective or as a law enforcement officer, you would understand how misleading a half-truth can be. And it's like how that can paint a bad picture when you're out there trying to figure out what happened. And unfortunately in life, we don't get that opportunity to kind of at the end take a look back at our own lives and say, okay, what should I change different, and go and change it. We have to live the life we live. So part of our job, my responsibility, your responsibility, is to bring a thoughtful process, to people to say, hey, are we thinking about this correctly? Now, I would never be as bold to tell you what's right or what's wrong. Hopefully you figure that out on your own. But I like to bring, kind of like you bring all the evidence to the table. And then once people know what's going on, then they can make the decision, right? It's not your job to say guilty or innocent. Your job is to say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to find all the evidence. And part of that evidence in the industry that we're in, I really believe, revolves around what we call the 8 benefits of life insurance, like you just talked about, right? Death benefit being one of them, but it's like, is it a guaranteed death benefit for the day that you die? Right? If you think about what we have, it's a liquidity contract, and the day we die, like you said earlier, if you die, what was Barb going to do raising the kids? She had to have money. She had to have liquidity, and so it was a promise to pay her and have her have money at that time. But more importantly, or just as importantly, not more importantly, just as importantly, we needed money between today and that day when we graduate. And so now we have, again, with whole life insurance, we have that vehicle that gives us liquidity today, tomorrow, the next, 30, 40, 50 years, however long you're on this earth. And we have access to those dollars as well at a guaranteed rate, right? So we know what that is. We know what that the exit strategy of all those contracts are, guaranteed. And that's the certainty that a lot of people, I think about you in law enforcement. Without law enforcement, we have a tremendous amount of fear in our lives. And so why is that? Is because there's not enough certainty. And so those 8 benefits that you can explain deeper with somebody if they want to reach out to you and talk to you, is those 8 benefits bring certainty that people are looking for. with a part of their money. Now, they're willing to take, it's a whole separate conversation we can have, but once people have certainty, then they're willing to take other risks that they wouldn't normally take. So maybe you can speak to that.
Well, yeah, and that is a beautiful thing because all we're taught is to put 100% of our money, 100% at risk, 100% of the time.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for disaster when it comes to our finances.
Yeah.
So why not have some in a safe vehicle that's going to be guaranteed to grow up and still use that vehicle for these other things that are more risky if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to, then you still have that certainty, those guarantees to keep you afloat financially.
Yep, it's a really a good point. So, hey, one of the things that you have a passion for, you have a couple passions that we want to touch on, and the first one was, I know you've been involved a lot in, again, you're out looking for people that are like-minded with you, and you're a big a fan of the Chamber of Commerce, and you love going out and meeting people that way. So, I know it's like you love being able to go out and tell a story and love the relationships you can grow in this business, but you do have a passion for law enforcement because you serve that community. You served in that community for so long. And I think you were telling me that you're going to be kicking off a website or a discussion specifically around law enforcement. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Sure, and I'll add one in there. Since I stumbled on the infinite banking concept running a real estate investment club, I also like to talk to real estate investors as well. Matter of fact, I'll be doing some speaking engagements and have been in and around Wisconsin to other real estate investment clubs. But as far as police officers, yeah, IBC for cops. It's not live yet, but I'm going to promote this concept to my brothers and sisters in blue to help them understand, again, how money really works. We're just locking it up otherwise. I just want to teach them some financial tools and tricks that if they decide to take advantage of it, I'll be here to help them.
Yeah, that was actually the real estate one was going to be the second one I was going to bring up, but I definitely wanted to have you put a plug in where, because I love the fact that you can focus and serve, I think it's a community that needs this conversation, that deserves this conversation. And so, and again, to your point, all you're doing is you're just gathering evidence, presenting it, and letting people kind of make their own choice once they know the whole truth, right? That's how I see it. And that's what you did as somebody in law enforcement is like, your job isn't to say it's right or wrong. Your job is to go collect the information, present it, and then let people come to their own conclusion, which typically is, how is this action of putting all my money in a 403B, which again is a 401k for nonprofit organizations or city employees, but how is putting all my money into these retirement plans aligned with my values? And sometimes when we ask that question and, when we look at things and put it in that context, there may or may not be an alignment, but at least it's a great question to start asking.
Absolutely.
So if they're interested in the law IBC for cops idea and that discussion, how would they reach you, Brian?
Right now, they can reach me at my email, which is Brian, BRIAN, Fleming, FLEMING, at Factum Financial. Brian.Fleming at Factum Financial. My phone number, my office phone number is 414-762-6849, 414-762-6849.
Gotcha. So if they're interested in that conversation, because it's the same conversation, but it's from the perspective of, hey, you live in a dangerous world when you're in that profession, and it could be any, it could be firefighters. There's nothing special about it except for you understand, you lived that thought process for 25 years.
Right. Matter of fact, after this recent think tank that we were at, I connected with someone and spoke to him. His wife was a New York State trooper, and she got shot in the line of duty. He understands infinite banking. He understands life insurance. And he says, Brian, I hear you're starting to do something for law enforcement. Have at it, and I'll help you promote it.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I would say anybody that's listening to this, if that's a passion of yours, if you want to have somebody that's been in your shoes to speak to your groups and to your community, which is, again, it's a very tight-knit community because very few people can understand, what the law enforcement community or the firefighter community or really just that the emergency worker community goes through, because it is a high stress. You see a lot of things that most people hopefully will never see, and you have to deal with a lot of different things. Again, I always say we all have our respective crosses to bear, but the people that do that work are special people. So if you have that community that wants to have the discussion with somebody that's been in their shoes, I'd say reach out to Brian. Brian.Fleming with one M. I always wanted to put two M's in there with one N. Brian.Fleming at factandfinancial.com. So you brought up the real estate investment groups. I know that's been big on your radar too because you love serving that community. Maybe tell me why is that so attractive to you?
Well, just because I've been in it for 30 years, I've had rental properties for 30 years. I used to run a real estate investment club. And again, that's how I stumbled on the infinite banking concept through running my club. And when you understand what this concept is, I mean, we could be a little bit biased and say it's good for almost everybody because it kind of is. I mean, they go and they borrow money from hard money lenders at really high terms and rates and everything. And I'm like, so let me teach you how to be one of those and make money doing that and your other stuff as well. Come on.
Yeah, there was a guy, I love the saying when he was talking about real estate, and he says, man, I love real estate, but I never want to own it. I said, I'd rather float the note, right? Because the true money's always made when you're lending the money to make it happen.
Absolutely. And I was actually at a different real estate club a number of years ago. The topic was funding your deals. They had conventional lenders up there, hard money, private money, whatever. And one of the guys who was a private money lender, he says, I've been investing in real estate for 13 years. But I decided I wanted to be the bank. Amen! I shout from the back of the room because he gets it. He gets it.
Yeah. Because again, you don't have to, just really quick on a real estate story I have, and people that have listened to my podcast have heard this, but I had a client, this is now 12, 13 years ago. Gosh, I think as time goes by so quickly sometimes, as you can tell by the gray hair in both you and I. But I had a guy that was flipping houses. And he said, I like this idea. I just don't completely get it, right? And I said, well, what don't you get? He said, why should I put money in a place that I have to borrow from? I said, well, do you love your family as much as you love Wells Fargo? I just shut up and just he pondered at me. He looked at me like I was like a horse's ass, right? He goes, well, hell yeah, I love my family more than I love Wells Fargo. But then I had it I sat there for a second, and in his mind he got it. He's like, oh, I get that. And what he got was, he was willing to pay Wells Fargo or the other hard money lenders that he was paying money, because he could buy property, but he had to go to hard money lenders to get enough money to do the flips because he was a house flipper. And I said, well, you're willing to pay them 10 at that time 15-16% interest for hard money loans for 6-8 months so he could flip a house and then pay him back. And I said, but if you use your own money, do you apply the same standards? And then do you evaluate if that project was worth it? Again, if we don't incorporate all the cost, which is, again, I could take that money and I could go do hard money lending, or I could take that money and I could put it in my own project. It should be charged the same. And if you think about it from that standpoint, that's why this mindset of, how do we take control of that banking function and how do we apply a set of rules? Because that's really all we're talking about, is applying a set of rules to our conversation. And then storing the money to where it gets all these other benefits that we've talked about. And then once we put it in that context, he goes, oh, I think I get it. I said, so here's what I tell you to do. The next deal you have, put all your money in your policy, and then let's apply these principles that we laid out. And so he did that. And then he said, oh, I got another project to do. I said, well, borrow against the policy, apply the same terms that you would have paid, Guido, the hard money lender down the street. And it was a 15%. And he said he borrowed the money, paid him, did all the transactions just like he was paying somebody else at 15%. He goes, oh my gosh, look how much interest that was going back to these hard money lenders. I said, that's just one transaction. I said, so let's expand that in the real estate market. 3 years later, he no longer was flipping houses. He'd become an exclusive hard money lender to people that were flipping houses. And that's why when I was talking with him, and again, it was good for him. I would never be able to do that because I don't know what a good flip is. I don't know what a bad flip is. But that was his expertise. So he was really good at that. So the investment world that people live in is typically unique to them. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a foundational savings vehicle. Right?
Correct. Absolutely.
So with all that said, I think it's just a great story to kind of illustrate. He says, I'm not breaking my knees and my back because flipping houses is a lot of work and very stressful. He says, now I'm lending money. He says, a little bit of stress comes into play to make sure that it's a good deal and that I have all the terms locked in. And he's become very good at it. So now there's very little stress and noise in his life because he's just lending the money. But it took him some time to build some capital, some money, some cash to be able to do it.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with taking a little time to get what you want.
Yeah. So as you go through your real estate investment groups, what would be the gift you can bring them, to those organizations? If you had one opportunity to say, hey, this is the gift I can bring you, what would that be?
Control. Because they'll control the finances, they'll control the purse strings, they have control. I mean, when you're able to have that control when you're doing a fix and flip, if you're still going to do that, and not have to worry about having to pay some money back because this is going to take longer than anticipated, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Have you seen people that had like success stories? Because I have one in particular I can think of. By having control, they either saved a project, saved a house, saved their skin, as it were. I'm just curious if you have any stories around that.
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking about is I had a gentleman he was purchasing a house. They were going to move, and he was going to purchase a house, and so the bank said, here's what the terms are. But actually, let me back up. They were building a house, not purchasing. They were building a house. And they go, here's what the terms are. And of course, the builder goes, oh, we got this extra thing. And they'd done that a couple times, so they had to borrow a little bit more from the bank. And long story short, the bank says, okay, we're done. And he goes, I'm like 90 days away from finishing this $1 million project, right? This multi-million-dollar project. And they go, sorry, we're done. And so he's like, well, what do I do? And they're like, oh, let's use the leverage in your cash value life insurance and your whole life insurance policy. So he borrowed against his policy, saved the deal, finished the project out, and then, and he was so thankful because he had the control of a pile of cash that wasn't encumbered by anybody. I mean, he's the one that had the last say in it. And then so it saved a project on his own.
And that's amazing that he was able to do that with cash value life insurance, just the way Walt Disney did, Ray Kroc did, and many others to save what they were building.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, and people should really hear that story. Walt, it was interesting. We were just recently down at the IBC think tank. It was in Orlando, Florida, and we went down to, Disney World in Florida is huge. And the conversation around that is like, the banks weren't willing to lend him money because he didn't want he was looking for privacy. And this is another big benefit of whole life. Mm-hmm. Like, if people heard that he was buying real estate and property, the prices would have gone through the roof. So he was borrowing against his policy because that's a private transaction between you and the insurance company. Nobody has to know about it. So there's some other benefits there as well.
Absolutely.
So, well, what would you like to share with my listeners, anybody that's, in your network that you would like to share with people as far as like, what does the future look? How do they work with you? What's your process look like, Brian?
Well, obviously they want to contact me and so we can have a one-on-one conversation just to see if this is going to be a fit for them, because it should be. They shouldn't really jump forward with something if they don't have an understanding of it. So we want to give them a couple. We've got a tough money course that we offer at Factum and a lot of educational tools that I can give them some information on how that would work. But obviously you want to contact me to see and to have a conversation. But one thing that I really like about this concept, not only because it puts you in control and everything, but on a value side of things, I think, being a Christian, I don't think we can be any better steward of the Lord's money than through this. We're in charge of His stuff, His property, and everything while we're living. And when you put your money in a properly designed dividend-paying whole life insurance policy, to allow it to grow, to use it to be a better giver, and to leave that to your family and loved ones and favorite charities at the end, I think that's going to be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, the gift to your children's children, right? That's the conversation. Well, and to that point, again, I always say to that point, I feel like Columbo. You and I are old enough to understand who Columbo is. A lot of the people we work with don't understand that. But anyhow, that's a different conversation. If we go back to the Bible, we talk about, we had messages, right, to the Pharaoh. Like, there's going to be 7 years of prosperity, but use that for preparing for the 7 years of famine. So that's really the conversation we have, is like, what are we doing in the good times to prepare for the bad times? Either take advantage of opportunities to be able to spread our word, or to protect ourselves from the chaos that's going to ensue. And that happens. It happens in the real estate market. It happens in every market. I could tell you stories of '08, people in real estate, how it saved their bacon, or the lack of liquidity, put a tremendous amount of pressure on people. And unfortunately, it ended poorly for a lot of people. So I think there's just that conversation. Like, there is an opportunity that are we preparing during the good times, and where are we storing our grain, right? Where are we storing that liquid, valuable cash in a safe, secure location. So, there's that part of the conversation that's super valuable for people to hear. And now, one thing, again, I like the process that you go through and the process you take people through, because it's never about selling them anything. It's more about educating them. And I've heard you say many times, Brian, and maybe you can expand this, like, if people know what's going on, they're going to know what to do. And the only way to get them to know what's going on is through a great amount of education and asking good questions like, is this where you want to go?
Absolutely. And, one of our favorite authors, Nelson Nash, we should never stop learning. We should never stop learning. It makes no difference what the subject matter is. And when it comes to our finances, I just want to teach people. Let's have a conversation. Let's learn about some things that you aren't taught. Because when you hear this question, what do you wish you would have learned in high school or college that they didn't teach you? Money, finances, taxes, whatever. We're not taught this stuff. So let's bring it forward. If it's right for you, great. If it's not, we're friends.
Yep, exactly right. So, all right. So, Brian.Fleming at factumfinancial.com. Your phone number real quick, just in case somebody wants to give you a call.
414-762-6849. 414-762-6849.
6849. Okay, beautiful. All I'd ask is the people that hear this, if you want to be part of Brian's circle or want to be part of my circle, reach out to us. If there's somebody in your life that says, hey, maybe this would be interesting, share this podcast, share the content that we're talking about. But more importantly, reach out to Brian, and we have hours and hours of education that we can help you, guide you. I said, we're in the guide service. We'll guide you through the process. We'll guide you through the education. But we have a ton of education. If it's in law enforcement or if it's in the real estate world, it's the same conversation, just a little bit different language. I think it's really about control, like you said, control of your money, where you're storing your money, you're getting all the benefits that your money deserves. And so being able to ask that question, answer that question on an I know basis versus I think basis is huge. Is where you're storing your cash, I'll ask the question one more time again, is where you're storing the cash, your money, is in the right environment towards getting all the benefits that you deserve. So with that, Brian, thank you so much. I always appreciate our conversations. I look forward to talking with you again. And again, for anybody that's listening, Brian's a great soul, and he will educate you and have a great conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for letting me join you. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, bye.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches, and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.